I've personally never put a ton of weight into the whole Marvel versus DC debate because I tend to like both pretty equally. But I do recall I used to have the opinion that Marvel did heroes better and DC did villains better. I don't think I still maintain that opinion, but thinking about it did spur me into putting Marvel heroes as DC villains up for a vote to my subscribers, and it won by a fair margin. So today I've rewritten the stories of some Marvel heroes and redesigned them to fit them into the world of DC as villains. Let's get into it, shall we? Let's go. Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
James Howlett never stood a strong chance of becoming an upstanding member of society, even before Amanda Waller got her hands on him. He was born a metahuman in the 1800s, long before that was a common occurrence. He and his half-brother Victor had an extended lifespan and the ability to heal from near any wound, though James's healing capacities far exceeded those of his brothers. On top of that, Victor had lethally sharp and strong nails, while James had the ability to grow bone claws from between his knuckles, an ability that would be enhanced to the nth degree someday. He and Victor moved around much and fought in many wars over their first century and a half of life. Of the two of them, Victor was the more violent, but in times of great distress and danger, James would fly into a berserker rage in which he'd slaughter anyone in his path, unable to control himself until the fury subsided. This made him an incredibly lethal weapon, which eventually got him on the radar of someone whose career would come to thrive on exploiting people just like him. Near the end of the 20th century, James and Victor were approached by a woman named Amanda Waller. She was creating a program called Task Force X, which would eventually take on a more colloquially used name, but she believed Victor and James could be perfect weapons for her arsenal. They'd lead groups of incarcerated metahuman villains on life-threatening missions that were highly covert and often involved very underhanded acts, but ones that Waller swore were for the betterment and safety of the world. If the criminals stepped out of line, the brothers were given explicit instructions to execute them. They both agreed and spent the next year on Task Force X, but Waller came to find that one of them wasn't quite the asset she'd hoped for. James was a loyal soldier, despite his occasional berserker rages that she wished he had more control over, but Victor was a loose cannon who would go off mission and be far too reckless. She wanted to let him go, but knew James was likely to leave if Victor was forced out. So she came up with a new plan. Waller created a mission for the task force to go after an assassin who was quickly making a name for himself as the most lethal killer alive. He was currently staged out of Gotham City, and his name was Slade Wilson, but he went by the codename Deathstroke. Waller sent James, Victor, and a small squad of 3 disposable Task Force X members to kill him, quite confident that this would be a suicide mission. Her hope was that Victor's weaker healing factor wouldn't hold up against Slade, while James's would, leaving him to remain on the task force with Victor no longer in the picture. Still, if they did manage to unexpectedly succeed, Waller would be content to see Deathstroke handled. Not only did Waller get what she really wanted out of this mission, but it went better than she could have imagined. They hunted down Wilson in a Wayne Enterprises warehouse and went straight for the kill. With little success. Deathstroke easily slayed the 3 squad members sent, and, with some fair effort, killed Victor as well, slicing his head clean off of his shoulders. As soon as James saw this, he went into a berserker rage. He tore through Deathstroke's defenses, but as the assassin tried to back off, 2 warehouse janitors came to see what the commotion was. James, in his blind rage, slayed the 2 employees, but while targeting them, he didn't see the blade slicing straight for his head. Deathstroke slashed off a chunk of James's head and left him in a heap on the ground, obviously assuming him dead. Waller sent a cleanup crew to dispose of the deceased bodies, and of course to retrieve the slowly healing James. They did scans on his mind and found, while it was certainly recovering and he'd be back to fully healed in a few days, he would have none of his memories. Waller used this to her advantage, both to ensure he couldn't leave Task Force X even if he wanted to, and to try and experiment on him, as he remained unconscious. She got her top scientists to inject liquefied nth metal into his body to fuse with his skeleton. This metal was from the distant planet of Thanagar, and was not only incredibly durable, would make him all the more indestructible, and turn his bone claws into lethal blades, but would give him the ability to defy gravity. As an extra precaution, Waller also had them place an explosive device in his brain that they knew couldn't kill him, but could incapacitate him for a few days if he ever got too out of control. Days later, James came to in a cell in Belle Prison. He had no memory of his past, but was told by Amanda Waller that his name was Logan, and that he was a vigilante killer with dangerous anger issues, serving multiple life sentences. She showed him surveillance footage of him killing 2 innocent janitors as evidence, with the footage too blurry to notice that his claws weren't metal at the time. Waller just let him believe that his claws had always been metal, not made so as a result of her experimenting. She then gave him the same spiel that every Task Force X participant would come to hear. Go on life-threatening missions, follow orders to the letter, and get your sentence reduced. He followed orders like a good soldier, but eventually Waller grew concerned that someone was likely to reveal the truth to James. A new budding vigilante in Gotham was looking into the disappearances of the janitors at the Wayne Enterprises warehouse. So to make sure he never put the pieces together, Waller prepared to send Logan and Task Force X after the Batman. James Howlett is far from the only metahuman to be lied to in order to be controlled. Carol Danvers spent 5 years of her life working as a member of the intergalactic peacekeeping force, the Green Lanterns. She had been convinced that she was originally from the planet Rann, by the Guardians of the Universe, the beings who commanded the Green Lantern Corps. They'd told her that when shape-shifting aliens, known as the White Martians, attacked her homeworld, she'd been mortally wounded trying to save her people. A Green Lantern had died on that same venture, and his ring had gone to her, to save her life and make her a Lantern herself. She was told, because of the severity of her wounds, that if she ever removed her ring, she'd die instantly. But that, with it on, she could remain alive as a hero to her corner of the galaxy. She had no memory of this, but took it as truth, despite what came to her when she shut her eyes to sleep. She had frequent nightmares of an explosion, and a ship, and a tall, bald man, but she could never put them together into any cohesive story, until she had a chance to go back to her true home planet. Heroes from Earth, known as the Justice League, were calling for any help the Lanterns could provide, as a White Martian invasion had been launched against their planet. Many Lanterns were pulled from their usual posts to assist, but Danvers was told to stay behind. This felt like a ridiculous request, especially considering her alleged history with the White Martians, so against orders, she went to help. She reached Earth while its atmosphere was in chaos, and quickly joined the battle against the shape-shifting aliens. She secretly hoped doing so would trigger some memories from the day she'd supposedly fought them on Rann, but nothing was coming to her. That is, until her whole body froze as a ship from Earth flew by her in the battle with a large L logo on it. Immediately, more memories flashed through her mind, expanding on the visions and her nightmares. She saw herself getting into a ship with some sort of rainbow glowing engine. She saw a Green Lantern flying into her path and knocking her out of the sky. Then, an explosion. The other Lanterns and the Justice League, along with all others assisting, soon had the battle under wraps, but instead of returning to Oa, the planet of the Green Lanterns, Danvers went down to Earth to investigate. She quickly found further evidence of the logo from that ship, and learned that it was the symbol of the company LexCorp. When she saw an image of its owner, Lex Luthor, she immediately got more memories flooding in. She saw Luthor shaking her hand, telling her what a historic day this was before she boarded the ship. After that, she wasted no time. Danvers tracked down Luthor and demanded answers about how he'd known her. The man was astounded to see her, and claimed that last he'd heard of her, she'd been lost in an explosion. He told her that she had been the test pilot for a joint venture project between Ferris Air and LexCorp. Luthor had managed to acquire one of each of the different types of lanterns that existed, powering the Green Lantern's rings and abilities, as well as those of all other sects of lanterns in the galaxy. LexCorp and Ferris Air had been using the technology to make and power a ship that could be the ultimate weapon in battle, and able to teleport itself across the galaxy in an instant. Danvers had been testing it when the Green Lantern of Earth, Hal Jordan, shot her out of the sky. Danvers didn't understand. If the Lanterns had been so against this project, why had they saved her and turned her into a Lantern herself? But soon a thought crossed her mind. Most other Lanterns were fine to remove their rings if they were in an atmosphere that could support them. Danvers was the only Lantern she knew that had never removed hers. She had been told she would die if she did. But now she wholeheartedly doubted that was true. She removed the ring and instantly her body pulsed with streaks of energy and lightning of every color. Her body naturally floated up off the ground and she felt power like nothing she'd ever experienced. Luthor smirked and said,
"Well, it seems they didn't want you as a Lantern, they simply wanted to control you."
She crushed the ring in her fist and exploded off the planet, flying beyond the speed of light to reach Oa in seconds. She flew to the gathering place of the Guardians, but they were nowhere to be seen. Danvers started firing explosive bolts of energy around her, demanding to know where the Guardians were. Other Green Lanterns tried to calm her, but anytime one got close, she'd blast them away. That is until Hal Jordan called out to her. He told her the rest of the story, that he'd struck down her ship thinking it was an unmanned project being enacted using stolen Lantern technology that he didn't want to see in the hands of a monster like Luthor. When the ship exploded, she'd absorbed the energy of every Lantern and had impossible power coursing through her. Jordan brought her to the Guardians, expressing concern of how that much power could corrupt anyone, and that it was all the more dangerous in an ally of Lex Luthor. The Guardians deemed it best to keep a close eye on her, so they wiped her memories and gave her a false ring that didn't give her powers, but suppressed all of her abilities, save for the ones of the Green Lantern energy coursing through her. Jordan apologized, swearing he'd never felt good about what they'd done, but Danvers didn't care. He'd nearly killed her, then not even given her a chance to do good with the powers on her own. She attacked Jordan, and it took near every Lantern on Oa to keep her from killing him. She was eventually forced to flee, but swore to return for both Jordan and the Guardians.
Quick interruption to say, in my weekly Patreon-exclusive Design Notes podcast series, I will be doing an episode specifically on how I came up with the designs and the stories for these characters. The Design Notes podcast comes out every Wednesday, and there's lots of other cool stuff about the PopCross Studios Patreon, like early access to art and access to all of my ink bundles, but personally now I'd say the podcast series is the most interesting thing about it. I'll link an episode that's free for everyone in the description if you want to get a taste of what it's like. That one specifically focusing on my famous anime characters in the Marvel Universe episode. But sorry for the interruption. Back into more stories.
The planet of Tamaran has had many periods of thriving, but one of the darkest times in its history was when it was ruled over by the traitorous queen, Commander, aka Blackfire. She'd stolen the crown from her sister, Starfire, by aligning herself with a tyrannical empire called the Citadel that took over Tamaran and put Blackfire in charge. Many terrible things came from this event, but one of the many people affected was a young girl named Gamora, born with a strange skin condition, meaning she appeared green instead of her species' common orange color. This defect didn't garner her any positive attention. Even prior to the Citadel taking over her people, she'd been an outcast. Once Blackfire took charge, like many others, Gamora was placed into servitude for the Citadel. She did not spend long in this role, however. The leaders of the Citadel were approached by the chief guard of the planet Apocalypse. This chief, called Granny Goodness, demanded slaves to be used as training fodder for her elite strike force, the Female Furies. These Furies would come to be some of the greatest warriors under the higher command of the murderous tyrant ruler of Apocalypse, Darkseid. The Citadel had no choice but to comply and instructed Blackfire to give up thousands of her people to be taken to Apocalypse to, essentially, be slaughtered. Blackfire sent many of those who'd already been put into servitude, including Gamora. But her fate was not as sealed as it seemed. You see, Tamaranians can absorb ultraviolet and solar energy to charge them up with enhanced strength, among other abilities. There was little of this light available on Apocalypse, so most of the Tamaranians lasted very little time in the fighting arena against the vicious Furies. Gamora, on the other hand, due to her altered physiology, was absorbing energy from the burning fire pits of Apocalypse, making her charged with as much strength as her people could hold. When she was finally put into the arena, she was not a fair match for the Furies, but she was able to keep herself alive far longer than the other Tamaranians. Luckily for her, Darkseid was present when she was put into the arena, and was impressed by how well the small girl was holding her own against Granny Goodness's finest warriors. Before the Furies could kill Gamora, Darkseid personally stopped the fight and stepped into the arena. He approached Gamora and said,
"You are an impressive specimen, child. I will give you two options. The Furies kill you here and now, or you join them in training to be of service to me."
It didn't seem like there was much choice in the matter, so Gamora agreed. She began her training with the intention of finding a way to eventually escape, but slowly came to see Granny Goodness and the Furies as her family. On top of that, she realized her old life on Tamaran had never been as good or purposeful as her life here on Apocalypse. She was brutally trained, but at least she had a path before her to become the deadliest woman in the galaxy and fight for Darkseid in whatever he desired. Given an opportunity to grow up alongside nobler and more morally sound beings, Gamora likely would have found purpose in more benevolent endeavors. But being surrounded by those who gladly served a monstrous overlord, it became all too easy for Gamora to see a darker path as the right one. The more time she spent with the Furies, the more she was convinced to hate her old life, and even to hate Tamaranians as a race, which made her all the more eager when the Furies were sent to annihilate the planet. In Gamora's years of training as a Fury, Tamaran had gone through a change in leadership. The true princess of Tamaran, Coriander, aka Starfire, had left the planet for some time, joined a team of heroes on Earth, and returned to reclaim the throne from her sister and the Citadel. Since this time, Granny Goodness had gone once more to Tamaran, demanding more sacrifices for the fighting arenas. But Starfire refused, even after threats of war. Granny and the Furies were then ordered by Darkseid to lead an army of his mindless warriors, the Parademons, to destroy Tamaran, to set an example of what happens when you refuse a demand from Apocalypse. Of course, the fight wouldn't be so easy, as Starfire's allies from Earth would bring aids of their own to battle Gamora, the Furies, and all of Darkseid's forces. Thor Odinson had always been a brash and reckless god. He reveled in battle and would take it wherever he could seek it out, to the great displeasure of his father, Odin. Thor didn't care about agreements or relationships his people on Asgard had with other sects of gods. If they were willing to fight, he'd have at them. Eventually, this led him to setting his sights on the island on Earth called Themyscira, sometimes referred to as Paradise Island. The Amazonian women who lived there were descendants of the pantheon of ancient Greek gods, and they boldly boasted to be the mightiest women of godly descent. This was all the goading Thor needed, as he saw it as a direct insult to the Valkyries, the warrior women of his people. Wielding his mighty hammer Mjolnir, Thor led a small army of Asgardian warriors down to Themyscira and demanded half of the island to make a new home for the Valkyries. Of course, he didn't care for the land, he simply wanted a reason to fight, and a fight is exactly what he got. The Amazons battled valiantly and managed to slay many of the Asgardian forces, but they on their own were no match for a god like Thor. That is, until a godly warrior of their own joined the fight. Princess Diana, now more commonly called Wonder Woman by the outside world, heeded a call for help and returned to Themyscira to battle Thor. A daughter of Zeus and son of Odin traded blows for hours on end, and Thor ecstatically thrived in the battle. That is, until Odin arrived. The Allfather did not come to join the fight, but instead to condemn his son's actions and apologize profusely to the Amazons. As way of apology, to try and keep some semblance of peace between Asgard and Themyscira, Odin attempted, there and then, to strip his son of his weapon and his powers, turning him mortal. But as soon as the Allfather tried this, Thor fought back. With his mighty hammer, he burst at his father in a crack of thunder and struck him directly in the head. The blow was so severe that the Allfather fell into a deep Odin sleep, with none sure of when he'd awaken. Thor tried to continue his battle, urging his troops onward, but they all refused to follow after what he'd just done to their king. Wonder Woman and the Amazons, however, were still more than willing to fight Thor, and with all of them against him, he was soon forced to retreat. He stayed on Earth, knowing Asgard would not take him back kindly now, but also embarrassed by his loss. In his arrogance, Thor believed that the only way he'd be accepted back on Asgard was if he took Themyscira in its entirety as a gift to his kingdom. But in order to do so, he needed more power. Wonder Woman was far stronger than he'd anticipated, and while he may be able to defeat her one-on-one, with the Amazons backing her up, his odds were not so good. That was when he set his sights on a target to acquire first. He learned that a group of mortal children had acquired the powers of some of the Greek deities, including those of Wonder Woman's father, Zeus. If he could take those powers from them for himself, pairing it with his own might, no other god would be able to challenge him again. And so, Thor set off to find and kill the children granted godly might by the wizard, Shazam.
Alright, I really love this because I love working with both Marvel and DC, and now I'm curious, should I do a different combination of this? Like DC villains as Marvel heroes, or Marvel villains as DC heroes, or DC heroes as Marvel villains, or even just another round of this? Let me know in the comments and give me whatever ideas you've got for what other characters I could use. Also, if you're new to the channel, you might want to check out my series of weird Marvel and DC fusions. I got a ton of those. Or maybe my recent episode of famous anime characters in the Marvel universe. That's a particularly good episode in my opinion. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is an idea that I heard from a man named Alex Hormozzi. And he was talking about how lots of people tend to go, and I've done this myself, oh, I'll start working on this project that I want to do when I'm less busy. Writing a book or working on a comic or something like that. And he suggests that it's better to start some project that you want to do long term while you are busy. Because inevitably there are going to be other times coming up in your life where you're busy again. So if you start a project while you're busy, you know you can make the time to work on it in busy times already. And so the fluctuation of busyness and non-busyness that will naturally come in your life will be something you've already proven to yourself you can work on that thing through. I hope that's inspiring. I love you all. I'll see you all in the next one on Monday. Goodbye.